He was only 17, still fumbling through the maze of adolescence, half child, half man, barely old enough to rent a car, yet somehow deep inside a world that even most grown men wouldn't dare enter. On the surface, it looked like a dream stitched together from the wild fantasies of youth. 3 older women, each from a different walk of life, each drawn to him for reasons that didn't quite add up. One was a familiar face from the neighborhood, another a woman of quiet authority with secrets folded deep into her smile. And the third? Well, some said she never played by anyone's rules but her own. Their relationships weren't discovered all at once. They didn't meet him on the same day, or even in the same season. No, this story unfolded in shadows, through glances held too long, locked doors, and conversations that paused the moment anyone else entered the room. It wasn't random, it wasn't harmless, and it damn sure wasn't love. Something was off, something about the timing, something about the way they each insisted they were the only one, something about how he stopped smiling around his friends, how he started checking his phone every 10 seconds, pacing in hallways, whispering names nobody else recognized. The tension didn't rise all at once. It built like pressure in a sealed room. And then, just when it felt like it might settle down, the floor dropped out beneath him. What followed wasn't just a scandal. It was a slow unraveling of a life already stretched too thin. His days, once filled with laughter and careless freedom, were now haunted by glances over his shoulder and late-night whispers he couldn't explain to anyone, not even himself. Friends began to notice the changes. He stopped answering calls. He drifted through conversations. The easy charm that once drew people in had been replaced by a nervous energy, as though he was always waiting for the next message, the next visit, the next threat. The women didn't know about each other, or maybe they did. That's part of what makes this story so difficult to pin down. Everyone involved had something to protect, an image, a secret, a motive. And when that many secrets begin to orbit around one person, the weight becomes unbearable. In the next few minutes, we'll walk through the moments he tried to keep buried, the encounters behind closed doors, the web of manipulation disguised as affection, and the decisions made when he was too young to see the trap tightening around him. This isn't just a story of forbidden meetings or whispered promises. It's a story of power, of fear, and of what happens when multiple people believe they own the same heart. He was 17, just a few months away from graduation, bright, athletic, with a half smile that disarmed both peers and adults alike. His name was Jason Bell. In a town where routine ruled everything, Jason was a spark in the dry grass. Young, curious, restless. Everyone knew him, or thought they did. But what no one could see was the private maze he was walking through, one paved with whispers, midnight knocks, and forbidden attachments. The first door opened with Miss Rena Shaw, his English teacher. She was in her late 30s, sharp-witted, stylish, with a kind of energy that made students lean in and forget the clock. What started as extra tutoring sessions quickly shifted into something else. Eye contact lingered. A hand on his shoulder stayed longer than it should have. One night, after a school play he barely remembered being in, she drove him home and didn't drop him off at the curb. The second was less sophisticated, less layered. Dana, the neighbor 2 houses down, was 32, divorced, with a kid Jason sometimes played video games with. Dana's approach wasn't gentle. It was bold, messy, impulsive. It began with an offer to help her move boxes from her garage, then a beer, then an unexpected hand brushing against his. With her, it wasn't about poetry or stolen glances. It was physical, unfiltered, intoxicating in a way Jason wasn't equipped to process. The third one was the hardest to explain. Family friend, church choir member, someone his mother trusted. Her name was Teresa Hill, married, mid-40s, the kind of woman who always smelled like lavender and had a Bible quote ready for every situation. Her involvement didn't happen in a rush. It built over months. Soft-spoken texts, warm smiles that hung too long, a birthday gift that was just a bit too personal. Jason never saw the moment it crossed the line, but once it had, she was suddenly everywhere, in his inbox, waiting by the school gates, asking questions no adult should ever ask a child. Each of these relationships unfolded separately, but in Jason's world, they overlapped. One fueled the excitement of another. One masked the guilt of the rest. He didn't understand what was happening to him, only that it felt good and terrifying and addictive. He had become the keeper of 3 separate secrets, each one heavy in its own way. There were nights he couldn't sleep, overwhelmed by what he was hiding. Days he skipped school, unsure who he was trying to avoid. He wrote in journals he never finished. He deleted messages he couldn't forget. The thrill was real, but so was the confusion, the shame, the quiet fear that he had stepped into something far beyond his control. And none of the women knew about the others, at least not at first. It was a Saturday, quiet, gray skies, the kind of day that hung still in the air. Jason had barely gotten out of bed when he heard it, the soft scrape of paper against wood. He opened his bedroom door to find an envelope. Plain, no name, no handwriting, just the unmistakable thud of something personal sealed inside. He stared at it, heart pounding. He knew this wasn't random. He knew it wasn't harmless. Inside was a single photo, grainy, taken from a distance, but clear enough. Him, Dana, in her car, his hand on her thigh. And beneath the photo, one line typed in a tight, cold font. "This ends now, or it all goes public." His stomach dropped. His mind scrambled. Who had taken the picture? Who knew? Which woman sent it? The walls were closing in, and one of them had just drawn a line in the sand. Jason kept the photo buried in his sock drawer for 2 days, too shaken to speak, too unsure to act. But the damage was already done. The illusion of control had crumbled. He just didn't know it yet. Because while he tried to carry on like nothing had changed, all 3 women had started to suspect they weren't the only one. It started with Raina, the teacher. She had always played it calm, almost maternal, but that calm was cracking. She began asking questions that weren't really questions. "You've been distracted, Jason. Seeing someone else?" she asked, smiling too long. Her tone dipped in something heavier than curiosity. He'd laugh it off, but inside something clenched. Then came the neighbor, Dana. One evening, she showed up unannounced, parked outside his house, watching his window like she was waiting for a flicker of movement. When he finally stepped outside, she didn't speak. Just handed him a bag. "Your hoodie, I don't want it anymore." Inside the bag, underneath the hoodie, was a note she had written in thick black ink. "I know about her." Jason didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. He was caught in a web that had started with adrenaline and flirtation, and now buzzed with suspicion and thinly veiled threats. And then there was Teresa. She had always been the most discreet, the most methodical, but even she was unraveling. She began texting him at odd hours, demanding to see him, saying things like, "Don't make me regret this," and once cryptically, "You don't realize what I've given up for you." Each woman, once a compartment in his double life, was now bleeding into the others, and he was the hinge. He tried to create distance. He skipped calls, avoided glances, but it only fueled the fire. One night, Renee cornered him behind the grocery store where he worked part-time. Her voice was low, trembling with rage. "Is it Dana or is it Teresa? Don't lie to me." He backed away, heart racing. "Renee, I swear, She cut him off. "They think you're theirs, but I saw you first." She smiled, but her eyes didn't. "You're not ready for what happens when women like us feel used." A few days later, a car window at the school parking lot was smashed. Dana's. She told police it must have been a random act of vandalism, but she never looked Jason in the eyes again, and he never asked her who she thought did it. He didn't need to. Jason started writing everything down. Dates, conversations, names. He kept a journal hidden behind a panel in his closet, paranoid, exhausted, unraveling by the hour. The thrill had long since died. All that remained was fear. Teresa became the most persistent. She began leaving gifts for his mother, bottles of wine, notes of gratitude. So proud of the young man Jason's becoming. It was a warning masked as praise, and it worked. Jason stopped responding to her messages entirely. That was the mistake. 3 nights later, he woke to the sound of footsteps on the back porch. Quiet, careful. A figure stood just beyond the glass, watching. The motion light flicked on. She didn't flinch, just turned and walked away. It was Teresa. Jason knew what this was now. It wasn't a game. It wasn't romance. It was control, ownership, and now they were punishing him for slipping away. The confrontation came soon after. It was supposed to be a normal Thursday. Jason had stayed late at school for tutoring. When he walked to the parking lot, Dana was there, leaning against her car, arms folded, her expression blank. "We need to talk." Before he could respond, another voice cut through the air. "You're not the only one who needs answers." Renee stepping out from behind another car, eyes burning. He froze, heart thudding. Then came a third voice from behind him. "Everyone's here. Perfect." Teresa, calm, controlled, cold. They had coordinated it, all of them, just to confront him. It wasn't loud, it wasn't violent. It was worse, it was quiet, surgical. Each woman, one after the other, laid bare what they knew, what they'd suspected, what they'd found. Old messages, photos, little tells that betrayed him. Teresa spoke last. "We're not angry, Jason. We're disappointed. We believed in you." Then she leaned close, just inches from his face, and whispered something he would never repeat to anyone. That night, Jason ripped the journal apart, flushed pages down the toilet, burned what remained in the fireplace. But the damage couldn't be erased. A week later, he found a voicemail waiting on his phone. No words, just the sound of breathing. Then a whisper. "Tick-tock, Jason." The line went dead, and all he could think of was the envelope, the first warning, the beginning of the end. Before we continue, pause for just a second. This isn't the kind of story you come across every day. This isn't tabloid gossip or urban legend. It's a haunting reminder that danger doesn't always wear a mask or break down a door. Sometimes it smiles at you across the dinner table. Sometimes it leaves a note under your door or whispers in the shadows when no one else is listening. If you've made it this far, you're already invested. You're already seeing what Jason couldn't, until it was too late. So take a moment. Hit that thumbs up if this story has pulled you in, if you felt the tension in your chest, wondering how deep this rabbit hole really goes. It tells us you're watching, you're listening, and that stories like these matter. Subscribe if you want more, because we bring you real cases that grip you by the spine, not just to shock, but to reveal just how quickly a life can shift from ordinary to something else. And tell us, right now in the comments, where are you watching from? Are you in a quiet town where nothing ever seems to happen? Or maybe a city where stories like this barely make the news anymore? We read every single comment, and more importantly, what would you have done if you were in Jason's shoes? Trapped between secrets and threats, would you have come clean, run, tried to outsmart them? Because Jason made his choice, and what came next, no one saw coming. Stick around. This next part, it changes everything. There had been enough lies, enough tension, enough pretending that this wasn't weighing on him like a stone chained to his ribs. He typed slowly, erasing every other word, trying to make it sound mature, decisive, final. But there is no elegant way to say goodbye to 3 affairs that never should have begun. He didn't assign blame. He didn't justify. He didn't offer apologies drenched in drama. Just one sentence, sent to all 3 women. "This has to stop. I'm sorry." A simple message meant to end what had already gone too far, but one of them didn't take it as an ending. The night moved on, unbothered. Streetlights flickered. The air carried that early spring stillness, the kind that masks unrest. And somewhere else, one of the women was already awake, reading the message, rereading it, her fingers trembling not from sadness, but something far more volatile. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't call back. Instead, she disappeared into her own thoughts, ones that had long since drifted from logic. And in that silence, she made her own decision. By morning, he was gone. His parents would recall waking up to an unusually quiet house. No clatter of cereal bowls. No rushed footsteps down the stairs. Just stillness. His bed was made, sheets tucked too perfectly for a boy who never folded anything. His phone was gone. So were his sneakers. But his backpack sat untouched by the front door, Calls went unanswered. Friends hadn't seen him. Teachers thought maybe he'd taken a personal day. But by nightfall, the fear began to bloom, and with it, the questions no one knew how to ask. It was a fisherman who found him, a shallow creek, just outside town limits, face down, still wearing the sweatshirt he never took off. At first, they thought maybe he'd fallen, maybe he was out for a walk, and something went wrong. But the bruises told another story. The autopsy would later reveal defensive wounds, blunt force trauma, a fractured wrist, and in the lining of his hoodie pocket, a crumpled photograph, torn at the corner. 3 women stood in it, smiling. He had scribbled something across the back in blue ink. Just one word: enough. The town didn't know how to process what had happened. Not right away. Not when the story unfolded piece by piece, each part more shocking than the last. The teacher, suspended without pay, was the first to come forward. Not out of guilt, but desperation. She had heard rumors, whispers in the faculty lounge, and when the police showed up, she was already waiting, hands folded in her lap like a student about to be graded. She denied involvement in the final moments of his life, claimed the relationship was emotional, not physical, but the texts said otherwise. So did the photos on her private phone. The neighbor was next, a single mother with 2 kids and a temper that ran hot beneath the surface. Her story cracked under pressure. She blamed the teacher, said she had been manipulated, that she only got involved to protect the boy from the others. Her timeline didn't hold. Her fingerprints did. And then there was the family friend. She said nothing at all. Not at first, not even when questioned. It took weeks for her to speak. And when she did, it was in a letter, sent to his parents, handwritten, 8 pages, carefully folded. In it, she admitted what none of the others had, that she loved him, that she knew it was wrong, that she had convinced herself it wasn't. She ended the letter with 3 words: "Please forgive me." 3 women, 3 stories, 1 dead boy. The trial drew national attention. Headlines turned him into a symbol. Commentators argued whether he was a victim, a participant, or a cautionary tale. But those who knew him remembered something quieter: a kid who laughed too loud, who flunked math but quoted movies from memory, who once gave his lunch to a girl crying behind the vending machines. His mother never gave interviews, but she did speak at the memorial. Her voice broke halfway through, but she finished. She said her son wasn't perfect, that he made mistakes, but he didn't deserve to become a secret buried by adults who should have known better. She looked out at the rows of faces and asked only one question: when did we stop protecting our children? The courtroom delivered its sentences. 1 woman faced time, 1 got probation, 1 vanished into early retirement. None of them looked at each other again. Years have passed. The trail has grown over with weeds and silence. But sometimes teenagers still leave flowers by the creek. No one tells them to. They just do. Maybe because they've heard the story. Maybe because they haven't. Maybe because something in them recognizes a truth we all keep avoiding. That innocence, once broken, doesn't return the same. And sometimes the people meant to guide us are the very ones we need protecting from. What begins in secrecy often ends in silence. But silence does not erase the consequences. This story is not just about 1 boy or 3 women. It is about the quiet failure of those entrusted with power, of boundaries ignored, and of a young life swallowed by decisions he could never fully comprehend. It's about how desire, once unchecked, becomes a slow erosion of judgment, of safety, of innocence itself. You may be tempted to ask who was at fault, but stories like this rarely offer neat answers. They leave behind a trail of broken moments. Text messages never deleted, stares held too long in crowded rooms, warnings dismissed because they didn't come with sirens. The truth is that choices were made at every turn, small ones, seemingly harmless, that accumulated until they formed a weight too heavy for a 17-year-old to carry. And the most haunting part? This wasn't a story with some unpredictable twist. It was a story shaped by the things adults convince themselves they can control, until they can't. A story about control turning into obsession, about affection warping into possession, about secrecy acting as shelter until it became a trap. A story that ended not with a dramatic confession or a final confrontation, but with a body in a creek and a town asking itself how no one saw it coming. If this story unsettled you, let it. If it made you angry, hold on to that. If it reminded you of someone you know, say something, because silence is the most dangerous accomplice of all, and too often it's the one we excuse. Share this story, not for shock, not for spectacle, but because someone out there needs to hear it. Someone who feels the weight of a secret, someone who thinks they're alone, someone who believes this only happens in news headlines and documentaries. But it doesn't. It happens in neighborhoods like yours, schools like yours, families like yours. Subscribe to this channel if you believe stories like this should be told, not just for justice, but for awareness, for the conversations they force us to have, for the truths we'd rather not face but must. Leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. Share your thoughts. Would you have seen the signs? Would you have done something different? And if you're still here, still listening, know this. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is listen to the story all the way through. Because stories aren't just remembered, they're warnings, and sometimes they're all we have left.